The scent of buttercream and rosewater drifted through the open window as the sun bathed the backyard in soft golden light. Irene Caldwell, 73, stood quietly in the kitchen, her worn hands trembling slightly as she dried a bowl that had long been cleaned. Laughter floated in from the patio, mingling with the clink of champagne flutes and the upbeat rhythm of a live jazz trio her daughter Lana had hired for the afternoon. It was Irene's birthday, her 73rd. But no one had said her name aloud since morning. Through the lace curtains she watched guests arriving in expensive cars, carrying gift bags and camera-ready smiles. A large sign near the flower arch read, "Happy 73rd to the woman who made us who we are." Yet Irene's name wasn't written anywhere. Not on the cake, not in the invitations, and most painfully, not on anyone's lips. She had spent the morning prepping the fruit trays, because no one else had remembered to. She had even ironed her blouse in case someone asked her to step outside for a photo. But the photo session had already come and gone. A group portrait had been taken in front of the rose trellis, with her children, Lana, Christopher, and Adam, beaming beside their own children. Irene had peeked through the hallway door, waiting for someone to call her name. No one did. Maya. Lana's sharp voice echoed down the hallway. "Go get your shoes, honey. The guests are arriving soon, and I don't want you asking silly questions." "But why isn't Grandma outside?" Maya asked softly. Lana paused, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. "Because she gets overwhelmed, sweetheart. She wouldn't enjoy it. It's too much for someone her age." "But I thought this party was for her," Maya whispered, confused. "It is," Lana replied coolly. "We're doing it for her. Not with her." Irene stood frozen on the other side of the thin wall, a plate of fruit still in her hands. The weight of those words crushed something fragile inside her. Not with her. She set the plate down gently, reached for a towel, and began to dry her hands even though they were already dry. It was easier than crying. The house hummed with activity. Waitstaff shuffled through the rooms, setting up champagne towers and arranging tiered cakes in glittering gold. The family portrait from a decade ago, the last time everyone had been together without resentment, was propped on an easel by the buffet table. Irene's face smiled from the corner of the photo, younger then, full of hope. But today there was no chair set aside for her. No toast raised in her honor. No one even noticed she was missing. As the afternoon wore on, Irene ladled herself a bowl of plain rice porridge, her stomach too sensitive these days for anything else, and took a seat at the far end of the dining room table, next to a potted plant someone had dropped in the chair meant for her. She ate slowly, listening to the sounds of celebration from the backyard. "To my mother, Lana," someone toasted. "The most generous, radiant woman I know." Cheers erupted. Another voice chimed in. "She's the glue that holds our family together." Glasses clinked. Applause roared. Irene closed her eyes. Not once had anyone said her name. She was invisible at her own party. Just then, a small figure crept into the kitchen. It was Maya, dressed in a frilly white dress she clearly didn't enjoy. In her hands she held a napkin folded around a small slice of cake. "I saved this for you," she whispered, placing it carefully in front of her grandmother. Irene looked at the child, her heart aching and full all at once. "Thank you, my sweet girl," she said softly. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I thought the party was for you." Irene managed a small smile. "So did I." And in that quiet moment between a dry napkin and a soft apology, the real celebration finally began. One no camera would capture and no guest would notice. The party outside surged on, laughter growing louder, champagne flowing like water, and a photographer weaving through the crowd snapping posed, polished moments. But inside the dimly lit kitchen, Maya stayed with her grandmother. Irene blinked back tears as Maya carefully unfolded a card from the pocket of her little purse. It was made from plain construction paper, slightly crumpled at the edges. On the front, a bright red heart had been drawn in crayon. Inside, in neat, careful handwriting, were the words, "Happy birthday, Grandma. You are my favorite person in the world. Love, Maya." Irene held the card gently, as though it were made of glass. Her hands trembled as she traced her fingers over the message. "You made this for me?" she asked, voice thick. Maya nodded. "I started it 2 days ago." I didn't know if anyone else would remember. Irene smiled, a real one this time, though her eyes still held the shimmer of sorrow. You remembered. That's more than enough. Maya looked down at her feet. I don't understand why they left you in here. Mom said you'd get overwhelmed, but you seem okay to me. Irene's gaze softened. Sometimes people make excuses when the truth is uncomfortable. They should have at least saved you a seat. Maya said, her voice trembling now. You're the reason we're all here. For a long moment Irene said nothing. She simply reached out and took Maya's hand, squeezing it lightly. Thank you, sweetheart, for seeing me. That's a gift no one else thought to give. The two sat in silence, the noise of the party muffled by the thick kitchen walls. The slice of cake, 6 layers of pink and gold frosting, sat untouched on the plate between them. Irene wasn't hungry, but she would keep it. Just as she would keep the card, tucked inside her favorite book on the nightstand. When Maya finally stood to return to the party, she hesitated at the door. Grandma, she said, I'm going to come back later, okay? When no one's looking. We can have our own party. Irene nodded. I'd like that very much. Maya slipped away like a shadow, her white dress rustling softly behind her. Outside, the music swelled as Lana raised another toast, this time to herself, to motherhood, to the sacrifices we make that no one sees. Irene heard the cheer that followed, sharp and empty. But in the stillness of the kitchen, surrounded by unwashed dishes and cooling platters, she pressed the card to her chest. Her body ached from standing, her spirit from being forgotten. And yet, for the first time that day, she didn't feel entirely alone. One child had seen her, had chosen her, and that was enough to keep the loneliness from swallowing her whole. Sometimes, a heart only needs one small echo to remember it matters. Later that evening, after the last toast was given and the final guest had driven away, the house fell into an eerie stillness. The party decorations sagged. Half-drunk glasses were left scattered on tabletops. No one checked on Irene. She sat alone in her room with the birthday card resting beside her, the ribbon from the cake box tied gently around it like a keepsake. She reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a tattered notebook, its cover faded, pages filled with nearly 20 years of carefully logged expenses. Not for herself but for her children. 2002 David's car repairs. $2,300. Gift. 2008 Lana's college fund shortfall. $6,000 loan never repaid. 2013 mortgage assistance for Evan. $8,750 emergency. Line by line, Irene had documented every silent sacrifice she'd made to keep her family afloat. She had paid medical bills when they couldn't, babysat for weeks when childcare fell through, given up her retirement travel plans to help fund Lana's lavish wedding. Now, on the night of her 73rd birthday, she had been kept from her own party. Not out of malice, she realized, but out of something colder, disregard. She was no longer seen as a pillar of the family. She had become a shadow in the hallway, an obligation in the guest room. Her children had been generous with speeches and praise, so long as the cameras were rolling. But none had sat with her. None had noticed the missing chair, the empty seat that should have been hers. Only Maya had looked past the performance. Only Maya had remembered the woman behind the name. Irene turned to a fresh page in the notebook. She wrote in clean, steady letters. May 6, 2025 birthday party.
No chair. No mention.
Only Maya brought a card. Only Maya remembered. She underlined Maya's name twice, then closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. The next morning, she sat quietly at the kitchen table as her daughter bustled around, still riding the high of the previous night's attention. Wasn't it lovely? Lana said breezily, pouring herself coffee. Everyone said it was the best party they'd been to in years. Irene smiled faintly. It was unforgettable. Well, we did it all for you, Lana added. Irene stirred her tea. Did you? Lana paused, confused for a moment, but said nothing more. Irene didn't push it. She had stopped expecting recognition. She had learned that silence often held more truth than words ever could. But something had shifted inside her. And when Maya came home from school that afternoon and slipped another little card onto Irene's lap, this one reading, "You're not invisible to me," Irene's chest ached with something that felt like hope. Because sometimes it only takes one person to make you feel real again. And sometimes that person is the only family that truly matters. It happened on a Wednesday. Irene had been feeling faint all morning, tired, dizzy, her legs shaky beneath her. But she didn't tell anyone. She didn't want to be a bother. Instead, she quietly slipped out for a short walk, hoping the fresh air might help. Outside the pharmacy just a few blocks from home, her vision blurred. The sidewalk tilted. Then everything went black. When she opened her eyes, she was staring up at a pale hospital ceiling, and four in her arm and a monitor beeping gently nearby. A young woman with honey-brown eyes and a warm smile was sitting beside her, holding a cup of water with a straw. "You fainted," the woman said gently. "You're okay now." Irene blinked. "Where am I?" "St. Mary's Medical."
I'm Samantha.
"I'm a nurse. I found you near the corner shop." "You were alone." "Alone." The word echoed. In the days that followed, Irene remained in hospital under observation. Tests were ordered. Medications adjusted. But what stood out most wasn't the care she received, it was the care she felt. Samantha came by every day, even when she wasn't assigned to Irene's room. She brought her warm soup, sat, and chatted when no one else did. On the second night, she even brushed Irene's hair, noticing it had tangled from days in bed. "You remind me of my gran," Samantha said softly. "She used to braid my hair every morning before school." Irene smiled, eyes misty. "I used to do the same." Dr. Elias Monroe, the attending physician, was young, early 30s, with tired eyes and steady hands. He didn't talk much, but his presence was grounding. He reviewed Irene's chart personally, explained her condition with patience, adjusted her meds himself when the nurses were swamped. One morning, after overhearing Samantha read aloud from a novel at Irene's bedside, Dr. Monroe said quietly, "She's lucky to have you." "I think I'm the lucky one," Samantha replied. That night, after her vitals were checked and the lights dimmed, Irene sat up in bed, a pen and notebook in hand. Not the tattered ledger from home, but a clean notepad Samantha had brought her. She began a new list. Things I never expected. A nurse who brought me soup and conversation. A doctor who noticed when I flinched, even when I said nothing. Someone calling me important, without expecting anything in return. As she wrote, her eyes filled with quiet tears. Not of sadness, but of something rarer, recognition. These two strangers had done what her family hadn't in years. They had seen her, not as a burden, not as background noise, but as a person who still mattered. And for the first time in a long while, Irene felt less like a shadow and more like herself again. The peace didn't last. On a rainy Monday afternoon, the quiet hum of the hospital ward was shattered by the sharp clack of designer heels. Lana burst through the hallway like a storm in silk, lips pressed tight, eyes scanning each room until she found her mother's. She didn't knock. "Samantha," she barked, spotting the young nurse spooning broth into Irene's hands. "Step away from my mother. Now." Samantha froze, startled. Irene's spoon clattered into the bowl. "Lana," Irene asked, her voice shaky. "What are you?" "I've had enough," Lana snapped. "You didn't answer your phone for 3 days. We've been worried sick. And now I come here and find you being fed by strangers like you're incapable." Irene stiffened, the warmth that had filled the room moments ago replaced by a cold edge. "Dear." Monroe entered just in time to hear Lana hiss. "Are you trying to get into her will? Both of you." Samantha stepped back, her face pale but calm. "Ma'am, I'm doing my job. Your mother collapsed alone. We've been caring for her because she has a family," Lana cut in. "We take care of our own." But the words rang hollow. Dr. Monroe raised a hand. "Miss Caldwell," he said firmly. "Your mother was brought in by a bystander. She hadn't listed any emergency contacts. She's been recovering well under our care. And no one is trying to manipulate her." "You expect me to believe this?" Lana's voice trembled. "You expect me to believe this isn't about money, about controlling her decisions?" Samantha quietly stepped outside. "Dr. Monroe met Lana's glare without flinching. "This is about dignity," he said. "Something your mother is long overdue." Lana's eyes flicked to Irene, who remained silent, watching with unreadable expression. Do you want me here? Lana asked finally, brittle. Irene lifted her chin. I wanted you at my birthday, she said softly. I wanted a seat at the table. Instead, I had a bowl of porridge in the kitchen while strangers toasted to me outside. Lana blinked. That's not fair. No, Irene agreed, it's not. But it's true. The room fell into a heavy silence. Dear. Monroe cleared his throat. Perhaps it's best we give you two a moment. But Irene shook her head.
No.
There's nothing more to say. Lana opened her mouth, then closed it. She turned and walked out, her heels echoing louder than before. Later that evening, Samantha returned, hesitant. I'm sorry, she whispered. Irene reached out and took her hand. Don't be. Grace doesn't need permission. And guilt always arrives too late. The week after Lana's outburst, Irene lay awake most nights, staring at the ceiling of her hospital room, the antiseptic scent mingling with memories of a life that now felt like someone else's. She thought about the party, the one she was never meant to attend. She thought about the chair that hadn't been set for her, the cake she hadn't tasted, and the daughter who only remembered her when reputation was on the line. But mostly, she thought of two people who had no obligation to her at all, yet showed up anyway. On a quiet Thursday morning, with sunlight falling gently across her blanket, Irene called her longtime lawyer Mr. Fletcher. His voice cracked with surprise when she asked to meet him at the hospital. I'd like to update my will, she said plainly. I want it to reflect what matters, not just who's related to me. Mr. Fletcher raised a brow. And what matters, Irene? Presence, she answered. Kindness. Integrity. The process was clinical, just as she wanted. No emotion, no ceremony. Just the clean, unflinching ink of new truth. 70% of her estate, her home, savings, and insurance, would go to 3 eldercare charities she had researched meticulously during her recovery. Organizations that fought for dignity in aging, for respect, for proper housing and medical care. 10% would be split equally between Samantha Nguyen and Dr. Elias Monroe. They didn't treat me like a patient, she explained. They treated me like a person. Mr. Fletcher nodded, taking notes. And the last 20? He asked. Irene smiled softly and pulled a small envelope from the drawer beside her bed. This is for Maya. But not yet. It's to be held in trust until she turns 21. What is it? He asked. A gift for the only one who remembered me on my birthday, Irene replied, her voice warm with pride. For the only one who asked why her grandmother wasn't at the party. She handed over a second envelope. This one contains the letter she'll receive with it. Please keep it sealed. I will. When the documents were signed and witnessed, Irene leaned back into her pillows, feeling lighter. For the first time in years, her legacy felt like her own. Not an obligation, not a transaction, but a statement of who she was and what she valued. Later that day, Dr. Monroe stopped by with her evening meds. You're in good spirits today, he noted. I took care of something important, she said. Something overdue. He smiled faintly. That sounds like you. When Samantha entered with warm tea and a fresh blanket, Irene looked at them both. The people who had no reason to stay but stayed anyway. And in that moment she knew. Blood may bind, but it does not define. Legacy, real legacy, is not measured in inheritance, but in intention. It started with a knock. Sharp. Impatient. The kind of knock meant to announce not arrival but entitlement. Irene was sitting up in bed, her hands folded over the fresh linen Samantha had just changed. Dear. Monroe had adjusted her meds that morning, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a quiet steadiness in her chest. Then the door creaked open. Lana walked in with her arms crossed, her lips pursed tight, and 2 of Irene's sons trailing behind her. Not one of them made eye contact. Not at first. We heard, Lana said curtly, taking a seat without being asked. About the will. The trust. Everything. Irene said nothing. You can't be serious, Mum, one son said. Leaving everything to strangers? To some nurse and a doctor? And charities. They're not strangers. Irene replied gently, her voice calm. They're people who showed up. Lana scoffed. They manipulated you. You weren't thinking clearly. I was clearer than I've ever been, Irene answered. The room tensed. Her sons exchanged glances, hoping one of them had the right words to fix what they now realized couldn't be undone. This isn't fair, Lana said finally, her voice breaking just slightly. After everything we've done for you. Irene raised an eyebrow. You mean the party you planned without me? Or the chair you never set? Lana's eyes flickered. You're still our mother. And that used to mean something, Irene replied. Until I became invisible. There was a long silence. We're not perfect, one son offered. But we're family. Irene reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a single manila envelope. She handed it to Lana. This is a copy of the trust documents. If you have questions, speak to Mr. Fletcher. I'm done explaining myself. Lana hesitated. Is this final? Yes, Irene said, with a clarity that left no room for hope. Because I've spent too many years saying sorry just to keep the peace. I'm not sorry anymore. But we love you. I know, Irene said softly. But sometimes love without action is just decoration. I don't need decorations. I need dignity. The door stayed open after they left. No slammed doors, no shouting matches. Just the quiet shuffle of footsteps fading down the hall. Later that evening, Samantha peeked in. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, Irene said. Better than okay. She turned her gaze toward the window, where the last of the daylight was painting the sky in soft streaks of rose and gold. She felt no anger. Only peace. She didn't need an apology, and she certainly wasn't giving one. For the first time in her life, Irene Caldwell had nothing left to prove, and nothing left to lose. Just the quiet satisfaction of choosing herself. The morning of Irene Caldwell's funeral was overcast, the sky hanging in a soft gray stillness. There were no elaborate floral arrangements. No slideshow of family vacations, no catered lunch awaiting polite mourners. Just a modest casket, a circle of white folding chairs, and a single framed photo, one taken years ago, when she still smiled like she expected to be heard. The service was short, simple, just as she'd requested. Lana arrived late, her black heels clicking sharply across the gravel path. Her brothers followed close behind, faces drawn with a mixture of regret and disbelief. There were whispers when they saw the small crowd, mostly staff from the elder care home, nurses from the hospital, and two unfamiliar young women from the local charity Irene had supported in secret. One of them, Samantha, stood quietly at the back. She didn't wear black, but a soft blue dress, one Irene once said reminded her of sea glass. Dr. Elias Monroe stood beside her, hands clasped, shoulders straight, eyes solemn. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. As the service closed, Mr. Fletcher, Irene's longtime lawyer, stepped forward. He held a thin brown folder and cleared his throat. Irene asked that I read a portion of her final letter aloud. The family shifted. She wrote, "If you're hearing this, I am already gone. And if you're surprised by what I've left behind, then you never really knew me at all. I do not believe legacy should be determined by bloodline. Blood is chance, but presence, that is a choice. So I chose." A pause. Then he continued. 70% of my estate will go to eldercare charities that serve the forgotten. 10% will go to Samantha Reyes, for seeing me when no one else did. 10% to Dr. Elias Monroe, for treating me with more dignity than most children afford their parents. Lana shot to her feet. This is absurd. She was manipulated. You all. She was of sound mind, Mr. Fletcher said firmly, without raising his voice. Legally certified, witnessed, and reviewed multiple times over the last year. Irene knew exactly what she was doing. And the rest? One of her sons asked, voice strained. What about the rest? Mr. Fletcher turned the page. An undisclosed portion has been left in trust for Maya Caldwell, to be revealed when she reaches the age of majority. She alone brought me cake when no one remembered it was my birthday. She alone whispered, "I love you," even if it wasn't permitted. And she, more than anyone else, reminded me that kindness doesn't need permission. It only needs courage. Lana sank back into her chair. There were no more outbursts, no more protests. just the distant sound of wind rustling the trees overhead. After the service, as others departed quietly, Samantha placed a daisy on the casket. Dr. Monroe followed, setting down a folded piece of paper, a copy of the poem Irene once asked him to read aloud during her last hospital stay. Weeks later, Maya would receive the envelope Irene left for her. Along with the charm bracelet, the letter, and a college fund meant not just to support her education, but to remind her of one enduring truth. Being present is more powerful than being born into a name. And Irene? She left no statues, no family estate passed down to undeserving heirs. Instead, she left behind something stronger. A legacy stitched not in DNA, but in moments of compassion, courage, and quiet rebellion. The kind that lives on not in the wills read aloud, but in the lives quietly changed. Have you ever wondered what legacy truly means? Not in dollars or heirlooms, but in presence, memory, and kindness? Irene Caldwell's story reminds us that it is not blood that makes someone family, but the choices they make when no one is watching. She was forgotten on the day meant to celebrate her life, excluded by the very people she had once sacrificed everything for. But in that silence, new voices rose: her granddaughter Maya's soft loyalty, a nurse's gentle hand, a doctor's consistent care. And from those simple acts of presence, Irene redefined her legacy. She left behind not an inheritance for the absent, but a testament to those who showed up. For older adults who have given so much to others, this story is a gentle call to reflection. Who has truly been there for you? Who noticed your silence, not just your service? As we age, we may lose certain roles or titles, but we never lose our right to dignity, memory, and love. You deserve to be celebrated with truth, not performance. So ask yourself, are the people around you showing up for you, or just showing off for others? And perhaps more importantly, how can you leave behind not just money, but meaning? Because in the end, the greatest inheritance we can offer is not wealth, it's the clarity to say, I see who you are. I remember who showed up. And that is what I choose to honor.